My sister texted me exactly 21 days before her extravagant wedding. The wedding I was paying $400,000 for. It was a Tuesday evening, raining lightly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my private penthouse office overlooking the glittering skyline of downtown Manhattan. I was sitting at my desk, a cup of Earl Grey tea growing cold beside my laptop, reviewing a series of heavily encrypted forensic audit files. Her text lit up my screen at 11:04 p.m. I picked up the phone, my eyes scanning the words she had chosen so carefully, yet so carelessly. "You can come to the wedding if you suitils pay for everything," my sister Bryn wrote. "But don't expect a seat up front. The front rows are reserved for Preston's family and the important guests. Please just handle the check and let the people who understand this kind of event handle the details." I read it twice. "Let me know where you are watching from, because I want you to imagine sitting in a silent room, reading those exact words from your own flesh and blood." I didn't cry, I didn't throw my phone across the room, I didn't scream or curse her name to the empty room. Instead, I leaned back in my leather chair, steepled my fingers, and I smiled. It was a very specific kind of smile, the cold, quiet smile of a woman who had just realized that the trap she had laid months ago was finally springing shut. I typed back a reply, a single sentence that I meant with my whole heart, every single syllable weighted with the cold fury I had been cultivating for 28 years. "Then I will keep the $400 and you can keep the seat." I hit send, and then I did something that changes the entire trajectory of this story. I did not sit there waiting for her to panic. I didn't wait for her to reply or apologize, or try to gaslight me into believing I was overreacting. I simply locked my phone, picked up my encrypted landline, and called my federal attorney, Marcus. By the time Bryn was sobbing into her phone an hour later, desperately trying to call me back, the $400,000 was already on its way back to my accounts. The venue, the Michelin-starred caterer, the celebrity florist, and the elite wedding planner had all received formal cancellation notices from the sole signatory of every single contract. Me. The grand aristocratic wedding Field family had planned without me had quietly, irreversibly, and completely come apart. Here is the story of how a woman her own family called just a boring freelance bookkeeper took back $400,000, dismantled an arrogant dynasty's illusion of wealth, and exposed a $600 million reality in a single, devastating afternoon. Welcome back to the channel. If you've ever been the scapegoat of your family, if you've ever been told to just stay quiet and pay the bill, stay with me to the very end. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to walk away from toxic family members, and be sure to subscribe. My name is Alara Thorne. I am 32 years old and I built an empire in total silence. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand the roots of this dynamic before you can fully appreciate the harvest. I grew up in a household where love was conditional, and the condition was usually silence. My mother Vivienne was a woman who valued appearances above all earthly things. She was the kind of woman who would max out 3 different credit cards just to buy a designer handbag so the neighbors wouldn't think we were struggling. We were struggling. My father had passed away when I was 7, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a life insurance policy that Vivienne burned through in less than 2 years, trying to maintain a lifestyle we could no longer afford. My older sister Bryn was the golden child. She was beautiful, outgoing, and entirely compliant with Vivienne's obsession with social climbing. Bryn learned early on that the easiest way to secure our mother's affection was to mirror her shallow ambitions. I, on the other hand, was the analytical child, the quiet one, the one who noticed the collection notices hidden in the junk drawer, the one who realized that the electricity was going to be shut off if I didn't secretly pawn the only piece of jewelry my grandmother had left me. By the time I was 18, I was working 3 part-time jobs just to pay for my own college tuition, while Vivienne took out a massive Parent Plus loan to send Bryn to an out-of-state private university where she could meet the right kind of people. The right kind of people in Vivienne's mind were people with generational wealth and recognizable last names. I graduated with a double major in finance and computer science, entirely debt-free because I paid my way $100 at a time. I started working in forensic auditing, specializing in tracing hidden assets for high-net-worth divorces and corporate fraud cases. It was grueling, unglamorous work, but I was exceptionally good at it. I could look at a spreadsheet and see the lies hiding in the margins. I could trace a shell company through 3 different offshore jurisdictions before my morning coffee. At 24, I took everything I had learned and built a proprietary algorithmic software that could detect financial anomalies with a 99.8% accuracy rate. I founded a fintech startup. I worked 100-hour weeks. I slept under my desk. I ate ramen noodles and drank cheap coffee while building a company that would eventually revolutionize the way federal agencies and multinational banks conduct fraud investigations. But to my family, to Vivian and Bryn, I was just Alara, the boring girl who stared at numbers all day. Whenever they asked what I did, I would simply say, I do accounting and compliance. To them, that translated to a low-level bookkeeper. I never corrected them why. Because I knew that if Vivian ever found out I was making real money, I would become the permanent solution to all of her self-inflicted financial disasters. So I maintained the illusion. I bought a modest 2-bedroom condo in a middle-class neighborhood, which I used purely for family visits. My actual residence was the penthouse overlooking the financial district. I drove a reliable 5-year-old Honda Civic whenever I went to see them, leaving the bulletproof black SUV and the driver at home. And then Bryn met Preston Whitfield. The Whitfields were old money, or rather they were the fading, desperate memory of old money. They were a prominent name in the county for 3 generations, boasting a grandfather who had owned textile mills, and a family that summered in exclusive locations and wore their last name like a royal title. Bryn was instantly mesmerized. She fell in love with Preston, yes, but I suspect she fell harder for the world he represented. The ease of it, the belonging, the illusion that she was finally stepping into the aristocratic life Vivian had always groomed her for. I was genuinely happy for her. At first I thought she was marrying into a family that would never have to worry about the collection agency calling at dinner time. When Bryn tearfully confessed to me that Preston's parents expected a grand, lavish wedding to maintain their social standing, and that Vivian had no way of paying for it, I made a decision. I offered to fund the wedding. I told Bryn I had been saving up and doing very well with my freelance accounting clients. I gave her a budget $400,000. It was a drop in the bucket for me. Honestly, my company was in the final stages of a massive acquisition deal with a major financial institution, and $400,000 was less than the quarterly interest on one of my secondary investment portfolios. I offered the money because she was my sister, and despite everything, I wanted her to have a beautiful day. I should have known that generosity, when handed to toxic people, is never viewed as a gift. It is viewed as a weakness to be exploited. The nightmare began at the engagement dinner. It was held at a private, members-only country club that the Whitfields could barely afford the annual dues for. I arrived wearing a simple, elegant black dress, no logos, no flashy jewelry, just quiet quality. I brought an expensive bottle of vintage champagne as a gift. Preston's mother, Eleanor Whitfield, was a woman whose face was pulled so tight by cosmetic surgery that her expressions were limited to varying degrees of condescension. She looked at me the way one might look at a stray dog that had wandered into a garden party. Alara, Eleanor said, taking my hand with 2 fingers, touching me for exactly as long as basic politeness required. Preston tells us you do some sort of bookkeeping work. How very industrious of you. She said the word industrious as if it were a mild, unfortunate disease. I work in financial compliance, evenly, my voice calm. How nice that there is such a steady demand for that sort of clerical thing, she murmured, already looking past me to wave at someone she deemed more important. That was the tone for the entire evening. During the dinner, Vivian and Bryn presented a slideshow of the happy couple. There were photos of the Whitfield family going back generations. There were photos of Bryn with Preston's cousins, Bryn at the Whitfield summer estate, Bryn with her new family. Out of 60 photos, I was not in a single one, not one. I sat there in the dim lighting of the dining room, sipping my sparkling water, watching my sister erase my existence in real time to appease her future in-laws. When Eleanor introduced me to her wealthy friends, she used the same rehearsed, patronizing line. This is Alara, Bryn's sister. She's a freelancer, very self-made apparently. It was always accompanied by a small, tight laugh. I swallowed the humiliation. I told myself what every victim of a toxic family tells themselves. It's not about you, Alara. It's Bryn's big day. Don't cause a scene. Don't make it about you. That is the trap. The trap that catches every decent person. They count on your love to make you swallow your own marginalization. They count on you being too polite to make a scene. Your decency becomes the leash they walk you on. But what the Whitfields and my mother and my sister didn't know was that I am not just a decent person. I am a forensic auditor. I see everything, I document everything, and I never ever hand anyone a blank check. When I agreed to pay for the $400 wedding, I didn't wire the money to Vivian's account, and I certainly didn't hand it to Eleanor Whitfield. I did it the way I run my empire. I became the sole customer, every single vendor, the elite country club venue, the Michelin-starred catering company, the celebrity florist, the live orchestra, the high-end photographer. I signed the contracts myself. Alara Thorne sole responsible party. I paid the massive deposits from an LLC I created specifically for this event. Because my career had taught me that a contract is the only promise that holds up when people stop being nice, I had my corporate attorney Marcus review every single document before I signed. Marcus is the man who negotiates billion-dollar acquisitions for me. He read the venue contract and circled a specific clause in red ink. Alara, Marcus had said, leaning across the mahogany table in our boardroom. You are the sole authorized signatory on all of these. Look at the cancellation terms. You are more than 90 days out from the event date. If you ever pull the plug, you get 100% of these deposits back. And absolutely nobody else has the authority to spend a dime of this or modify the arrangements. But you, why would I pull the plug? I had asked, sipping my coffee. It's my sister's wedding, just know that you can, Marcus said, closing the folder. It is always good to know exactly where the exit is. I filed those contracts away in a secure digital vault and forgot about Marcus's words. I would remember them months later, when the true nature of the Whitfield family was fully revealed. The slow burn of my erasure continued over the next 8 months. The wedding planning, which was supposed to be a bonding experience between sisters, was completely hijacked by Eleanor and Vivian. Vivian was so desperate to be accepted by Eleanor that she essentially became her assistant. I was systematically cut out of every decision. When the custom invitations were printed and mailed out, they bore the Whitfield family crest. The text read, Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Whitfield request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Preston, to Bryn. There was no mention of my mother. There was certainly no mention of me, the woman financing the heavy cardstock and the gold foil lettering. At the dress fitting at a high-end bridal boutique in the city, an appointment I was paying $15,000 for, I was asked to wait in the front lobby. It's just that there's not a lot of space back there, Alara, Bryn had said, looking nervously at Eleanor. And Eleanor has such a good eye for the tailoring. You can just wait here, right? It won't take long. I sat in that plush velvet chair in the lobby for 3 hours. The woman who bought the dress was parked like a chauffeur. I watched the sales associates bring them champagne. I watched them laugh and take photos through the glass doors. I sat quietly, scrolling through my phone, reviewing the final terms of my company's $600 million acquisition deal. I sat in silence. I did not complain, I just watched and I documented. What I began to realize during those 8 months was a truth I had overlooked. The Whitfield family's money was gone. The textile mills had closed decades ago. What they had left was an imposing mansion that desperately needed a new roof, a recognizable last name, and a ferocious, bottomless need to be perceived as people who still mattered. Old money with empty pockets is the most dangerous kind of vanity, because it has nothing left to protect but the appearance of wealth. And here came Alara, the boring bookkeeper sister, with an inexplicable budget of $400 and offering to fund the exact kind of extravagant spectacle that would prove to the county that the Whitfields were still powerful. They wanted my money with a desperate, grasping hunger. They just couldn't stomach the idea of me sitting at the head table while they spent it. The breaking point arrived quietly in the form of a PDF attachment. It was the seating chart. A wedding seating chart is a map of social hierarchy. It is a physical manifestation of who matters, who has power, and who is relegated to the shadows. In any normal wedding, the immediate family of the bride sits in the front row. The people whose blood and sweat got the bride to that altar. I assumed I would be in the front row. I had paid for the venue. I had supported my sister when our mother couldn't. I had earned that seat, but the Whitfields had a different map. In their map, the front rows were prime real estate, and real estate to a family clinging to a fading legacy is everything. The front rows were reserved for the state senator, the wealthy bankers Gerald Whitfield owed money to, and the elite country club members they were trying to impress. There was simply no room in the front for a freelance bookkeeper. I found out about it by accident. Bryn had accidentally CC'd me on an email thread with the wedding planner. I opened the attachment and zoomed in on the diagram. There it was, printed in elegant script, row 6, behind the senator I had never met. Behind Preston's third cousin's row 6. I picked up my phone and called Bryn. I kept my voice perfectly modulated, calm, reasonable, the voice of a professional asking for clarification on a discrepancy. Bryn, I said, I just saw the draft of the seating chart. I think there's a typo. You have me listed in row 6. The long, agonizing pause on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't a typo. Oh, Alara, yeah. Bryn's voice was careful, rehearsed, entirely devoid of sisterly warmth. So the thing is, the front rows are kind of spoken for. Eleanor's side of the family is really large, And there are some very important political contacts coming on Preston's side. Bryn, I am your sister. I am the sole financial sponsor of this event. I know. She rushed to say, it's just Eleanor feels really strongly that the front of the ceremony should reflect, the family's standing in the community. And our mother agrees. The family's standing, Anne Bryn continued, her voice dropping into a patronizing tone that sounded exactly like Eleanor Whitfield. Honestly, Alara, it's not a big deal where you sit. You'll still be in the room. Eleanor said that you should just handle the check and let the people who understand high society events handle the details that matter. Just handle the check, let the people who matter handle the details. There it was, the absolute, unvarnished truth spoken aloud by my own sister. I was not family, I was a funding source, I was an ATM they would tolerate in the back row, as long as the cash kept flowing. I didn't yell, I didn't raise my voice by a single decibel, I just took a slow, deep breath, gazing out at the New York skyline. I see, I said softly. Let me think. I hung up the phone, I sat in my penthouse, the silence of the room wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. I gave them one more chance. I waited 24 hours to see if my sister would realize what she had done, to see if the guilt would eat at her and prompt an apology. Instead, the next night at 11, she sent the text. The text that sealed her fate and the fate of the entire Whitfield dynasty. You can come to the wedding if you still pay for everything, Bryn wrote. But don't expect a seat up front. The front rows are reserved for Preston's family and the important guests. Please just let this go, it's not about you. I read it 3 times. The words glowed on the screen of my phone, stark and undeniable. I waited for the hurt to take me down the way it had 100 times over the past year. But the hurt didn't come, instead something else rose up inside me. Something clean and cold and incredibly clarifying. Like the first drop of icy water after a long parched journey through the desert. It wasn't rage, it wasn't grief, it was the absolute crystalline certainty of a woman who has finally reached the absolute limit of her tolerance. I looked at the encrypted drive on my desk containing the forensic audit files of the Whitfield estate that I had run out of pure curiosity a month ago. I looked at the green leather folder sitting on my side table containing the physical copies of every single vendor contract, signed by me, Alara Thorne, sole responsible party. I picked up the green folder, and for the first time in my life I stopped being the compliant sister, the reliable scapegoat, the quiet financial safety net. I opened the folder. The venue deposit, $150,000 balance not due for 21 days. Cancellation clause more than 14 days out, 100% refund minus $500 administrative fee. The Michelin-starred caterer, 85 deposit, 100% refundable up to 10 days before the event. The florist, the band, the photographer, all of them mine, all of them cancelable, all of them with deposits that came back directly to my LLC, not to anyone named Whitfield. Every single thread of that aristocratic wedding ran through my signature. If you pulled me out, there was no wedding, there was just a date, an empty field, and a family with a fading name and empty pockets. I picked up my phone and I typed my answer. I didn't type it in anger, I typed it slowly, with the meticulous precision of a surgeon making an incision. Then I will keep the $400,000 and you can keep the seat. I hit send and then I called Marcus. It was 9 p.m. If you have spent your entire life being the one who absorbs the impact, the one who pays and smiles and steps to the back so everyone else can be comfortable, the one who has been taught that loving your family means letting them treat you as less, then you know exactly how terrifying it is to finally pick up the phone and refuse. If that is you, I promise you the ground holds when you stand up. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring. Alara, it's past 11. Are the servers under a cyber attack? No, I said, my voice steady. But I need you to execute a series of legal actions for me right now, and I need to do it tonight before I lose my nerve by morning. I told him about the text. I summarized the entire 8 months of humiliation into 90 seconds. Row 6, just handle check. Let the people who matter handle the details. You can come if you still pay. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then his voice shifted into the cold, calculated tone I paid him 7 figures a year for. Okay, what are my instructions? I want out all of it, the country club, the caterer, the florist. I am the sole responsible party. I want to exercise every single cancellation right I have, and I want every dollar routed back to the corporate account. I want the formal notices sent tonight. You understand what this means, Alara? Marcus said. It means there is no wedding, not at these venues, not on this date. I understand perfectly. I replied. They want my $400 and they want me invisible in row 6. They cannot have both. I am choosing which one I keep, understood? Marcus said. I will start making the calls at 8. No, oh, I said sharply. Start tonight, Alara. The venue offices are closed. The country club has a 24-hour emergency event concierge line for premium members. I said, reciting Section 9 of the contract from memory. The caterer has an after-hours emergency contact. I want it on the legal record, timestamped tonight, that I am formally invoking the cancellation clauses. I want there to be no morning where someone can call my sister first and spin a narrative before the facts are set in stone. There was a brief pause and then Marcus chuckled, a low sound of deep professional respect. You really do read every single line of the contracts, don't you? It is the only reason a woman like me ever builds an empire, I said quietly. Nobody hands us the benefit of the doubt, Marcus, so we keep our power in writing. Give me 45 minutes. Marcus said, I'll make the calls and send the formal digital notices tonight so they are timestamped. And he paused. Are you absolutely certain? Once I hit send, this is real. Your sister is going to be devastated. I looked out at the city lights. I thought about the slideshow with 0 photos of me. I thought about the 3 hours in the lobby of the bridal boutique. Bryn is going to be devastated either way, I said softly. She can be devastated as a woman who finally learned her sister has limits, or she can stay comfortable as a woman who learned her sister has none. Send the notices, Marcus. I didn't go to sleep. I sat in my leather chair, the green folder on my lap. And I waited. I knew with the absolute certainty of blood ties that Bryn would call. She did exactly 1 hour later. Here is what happened in that hour on the other side of the city while I sat in my silent penthouse. Marcus, ever the ruthless professional, was thorough and lightning fast. He called the country club's emergency concierge line and reached the senior event director. He identified himself as my lead corporate counsel, stated that I, Alara Thorne, the sole signatory, was formally invoking the cancellation clause, and demanded immediate written confirmation of the refund timeline. He sent the follow-up email while still on the phone, timestamped at 11:31 p.m. He did the exact same thing with the Muslim caterer's after-hours line. Then, a voicemail and a formal email to the elite wedding planner, the same planner the Whitfields had been treating as their personal servant, the one who had drawn up that insulting seating chart. So here is the chronological sequence that matters. At 11:04 p.m., Bryn texted me. At 11:06 p.m. I replied. At 11:09 p.m. 35 p.m., the venue and the caterer had formal, legally binding, time-stamped notice that the massive funding was being pulled by the only person on earth who had the legal right to spend it. My sister called me at 12:05 a.m. By the time Bryn dialed my number, sobbing uncontrollably, the wedding was already over. The $400,000 was already reversing its course in the banking system, heading back to my corporate accounts. She was calling to undo something that was already permanently, irreversibly done. The phone lit up in the dark room. Bryn's contact photo flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times to steady my pulse. Then I answered. Alara. She was hyperventilating, the words tumbling over each other in sheer panic. Alara, what did you do? The venue, the event director, just called me on my emergency line. She said you cancelled. She said your corporate lawyer called and that the dates are being released. Alara, the wedding is in 21 days. What did you do? I did exactly what I told you I would do, Bryn, I said. My voice was eerily calm, the same voice I use when dismantling a fraudulent shell company in a boardroom. You told me I could come to the wedding if I continued to pay, but not to expect a seat up front. I told you I would keep the money and you could keep the seat. I am a woman of my word. I kept the money, but you can't. You can't do this, she shrieked, the panic escalating into hysteria. Everything is booked, the invitations are sent. The state senator is coming. Eleanor is going to have a literal heart attack. Why would you do this to me? And there it was, the classic refrain of the toxic family dynamic. Why would you do this to me? As if I were the one who had initiated the cruelty. As if the 8 months of systematic erasure, the humiliation at the dress fitting, the insulting seating chart, and the demand that I just handle the check were simply the weather, and my one single act of self-respect was an unprovoked natural disaster. Bryn, I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the heavy, freezing weight of absolute boundary. I want you to listen to me very carefully because I am only going to say this once. I did not do this to you, I simply declined to do something to myself. Silence on the other end, save for her ragged breathing. I have been treated by the people you have chosen to surround yourself with as an ATM with a pulse, I continued. And tonight my own sister told me in writing that I could finance her aristocratic fantasy, but I was not deemed worthy enough to sit in the front row. So I made a business decision. I chose my dignity over your party. I would have thought you, of all people, would understand why. You're being incredibly selfish. She sobbed, and I could hear Eleanor's script in her voice. It wasn't Bryn speaking, it was the Whitfield programming. It's my wedding and you're blowing up my entire life over your ego. Because you didn't get a good enough chair. A good enough chair? A dry, humorless laugh escaping my lips. Bryn, it was the front row at the wedding I was entirely funding. It was the seat our father should have been in if he were still alive. It was the one seat in that entire venue that actually belonged to me. Alara, please, I didn't blow up your wedding over a chair, Bryn, I said coldly. You and Eleanor blew it up when you decided that the aesthetic of the chair mattered more than the sister paying for it. I just stopped financing the privilege of being told that I don't matter. She was crying harder now, but the quality of the tears had shifted. The hysteria was breaking, giving way to a dawning, terrifying realization of the practical reality. Eleanor is going to lose her mind, Bryn whispered, her voice trembling with genuine fear. She'll never forgive me, Alara. The Whitfields can't cover this. $400,000. They don't have it. Preston told me in secret that they are basically broke. They've been counting on. She stopped, the words catching in her throat as she realized what she was about to confess. They've been counting on the boring freelance bookkeeper this whole time. I finished for her. My tone gentle but lethal. That is the part that should make you the angriest, Bryn, if you ever stop to think it through. They despised me and they entirely depended on me at the exact same time. They wanted me invisible and they wanted me paying. And the only person in this entire narrative who was asked to be both invisible and endlessly generous was me. She didn't answer, the silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with consequence. Let me tell you about that $400,000, Bryn, I said softly. Because you seem to think it's just monopoly money. That money is the result of me working 100-hour weeks for 8 years. It's the result of me sleeping under a desk while you frit sorority parties on Vivian's dime. I offered it gladly because I wanted you to have a beautiful day. But there is a massive difference between giving a gift and being taken from. I'm sorry, she choked out. Giving is when someone receives your gift and acknowledges your humanity. Being taken from is when they demand you keep your hand open but force you to turn your face away. I am done letting this family take from me, Alara. Please, I love you, Bryn, I said, the finality in my voice echoing in the quiet penthouse. But I will not fund my own humiliation, not even for you. Go to sleep, we will talk when you are out of Eleanor's shadow. I hung up the phone. I slept for 8 solid hours, the sleep of the truly justified. The next morning at precisely 8:15 a.m. the storm hit. My phone began to ring incessantly. Vivian called 6 times, Eleanor Whitfield called 4 times. I ignored all of them. I had a multi-million-dollar tech empire to run, algorithms to review, and board meetings to attend. I let them marinate in the absolute terror of a cancelled, unpaid, unrecoverable disaster. At noon I finally listened to Eleanor's voicemail. It was a masterpiece of aristocratic delusion. Alara dear, her voice began, dripping with a sickeningly sweet, false grace. I believe there has been a terrible misunderstanding with the country club. The event director seems to think you've cancelled the contracts. Obviously, this is some sort of clerical error on your end. You need to rectify this immediately, as the invitations have already been dispatched. This little tantrum of yours has gone far enough. Call me back the second you get this so we can reinstate the funding. This little tantrum of yours, reinstate the funding. She spoke to me as if I were an errant employee who had misplaced a file, completely oblivious to the fact that I held the nuclear codes to her entire social existence. I didn't call her back. I sent a single text message to my sister Bryn, CCing Vivian and Eleanor Whitfield. If the Whitfield family wishes to discuss the status of the wedding contracts, they can meet me at 2:00 p.m. today at my corporate office. Address attached. I will not be taking phone calls. I attached the address of my company's sleek, towering glass headquarters in the financial district. I knew they would come. They had no other choice. They were drowning, and I was the only person with a lifeboat. At precisely 1:50 p.m. the security desk in the grand lobby of my building called up to my penthouse office. Imsthorn, the head of security, said, his voice laced with the utmost professional deference. We have a party of 3 here at the desk, a Mrs. Vivian Thorne, a Ms. Bryn Thorne, a Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield. They are demanding to see you immediately. They claim they don't have an appointment because it's a family emergency. And the older woman, Mrs. Whitfield, is being quite aggressive with my staff. I smiled, my gaze locked on the sweeping panoramic view of the Hudson River. Let them up, David. Escort them to conference room A on the executive floor. I will be with them shortly, understood Miss Thorne. I didn't rush, I took my time. I finished reviewing a quarterly earnings report, replied to 2 emails from my board of directors, and poured myself a fresh cup of Earl Grey tea. I wanted them to sit in that conference room and marinate in the sheer scale of the environment. My corporate headquarters was not a small, dusty accounting office in a strip mall. It was 30 floors of cutting-edge architectural design, steel and reinforced glass. Conference Room A was a masterpiece of intimidation. It featured a 30-foot table made of imported black marble, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire financial district, and digital screens that displayed real-time global market data. When I finally walked in 15 minutes late, the scene was exactly what I had anticipated. Bryn was sitting at the far end of the massive marble table looking small, pale, and entirely terrified. Vivian was pacing the length of the room, her eyes darting nervously around the opulence she couldn't comprehend. Eleanor Whitfield was standing by the windows, her arms crossed, projecting an aura of defensive, aristocratic fury that was failing miserably against the cold corporate reality of the room. The moment I stepped through the double glass doors, flanked by Marcus and my executive assistant, silence fell over the room like a heavy shroud. "Alara," Vivian barked, recovering her voice first. She marched toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished concrete floor. "What on earth is the meaning of this? Why did we have to go through 3 layers of security? And what is this place? You told us you worked for a small bookkeeping firm." I didn't answer her. I walked past my mother, my designer heels making no sound at all, and took my seat at the absolute head of the massive table. I placed my green leather folder on the black marble surface. Marcus stood to my right, a silent, imposing figure in custom Italian suit holding a sleek tablet. "Sit down, Vivian," I said calmly. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the absolute, unquestionable authority of a CEO in her own domain. Vivian blinked, stunned by the command. She had never heard me speak like that. She hesitated, looked at Eleanor, and then slowly sank into a leather chair. Eleanor, however, refused to sit. She leaned over the table, her eyes narrowing with aristocratic venom. "I don't care what this little corporate charade is, Alara," Eleanor hissed. "You have humiliated our family. You have embarrassed us in front of the most prominent event coordinators in the county. You will call the country club right this second, you will reinstate the $150,000 deposit, and you will apologize to the event director for this infantile outburst. Do you have any idea the damage you are causing to the Whitfield name?" I looked at her, I really looked at her. I saw the desperate, grasping panic behind her eyes. I saw the cheap cubic zirconia necklace she was wearing, attempting to pass it off as an heirloom diamond. I saw the fraying edges of her so-called dynasty, the Whitfield name, I repeated softly, tasting the words. I opened the green folder and extracted a single sheet of paper. "Let's talk about the Whitfield name, Eleanor. Marcus, if you would." Marcus tapped the screen of his tablet. Immediately, the massive digital screen on the wall behind me flickered to life. It didn't display market data anymore. It displayed a highly detailed, impeccably researched forensic financial audit of the Whitfield family estate. Eleanor's face drained of color, turning a sickly ashen gray. "What is this?" Vivian asked, squinting at the screen, unable to comprehend the complex financial charts. "This, mother," I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the marble table, "is reality. You see, Eleanor, you made a very critical error when you decided to treat me like a disposable ATM. You forgot that I am a forensic auditor. I don't just write checks, I trace the money, all of it." I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the screen. "The textile mills your family loves to brag about. Sold off in 1998 to cover mounting gambling debts incurred by Preston's grandfather. Your historic, currently carrying 3 separate mortgages, the latest of which is in pre-foreclosure status as of Tuesday morning. Your son Preston, whom you have paraded around as some sort of aristocratic prize, has 0 liquid savings, $80 in credit card debt, and a salary that barely covers the interest on his luxury car lease." Bryn gasped, flying to her mouth as she stared at the screen. "Preston is in debt," she whispered, her entire illusion shattering in real time. "They are broke, Bryn," I said gently, looking at my sister. "They have been broke for a decade. The grand, lavish wedding they demanded, the one they insisted had to be at the country club to maintain their status, they couldn't have afforded the down payment on the floral arrangements." I turned my gaze back to Eleanor, who was gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles were white. "You didn't just want my money, Eleanor," I said, my voice dropping into a register of pure, cold steel. "You needed it. You desperately needed the boring freelancer's money to throw a party you couldn't afford. so you could feel like the somebody your bank account explicitly says you are not anymore. You depended on me and yet you despised me for it. This is illegal. Eleanor shrieked, her aristocratic facade completely dissolving into a frantic, ugly panic. You hacked into our private records. I will sue you, I will destroy you. Mrs. Whitfield, Marcus, his tone mild and amused. Everything displayed on that screen was obtained through publicly available records, tax liens and standard corporate due diligence. It is entirely legal and I would strongly advise against threatening the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation in her own boardroom. CEO? Vivian repeated, her voice trembling as she finally looked around the room, truly understanding the scale of the environment she was sitting in. Alara, what is going on? What is this company? I closed the folder. I looked at my mother, the woman who had spent my entire life prioritizing a shallow social climbing illusion over her own daughter's well-being. This is my company, Vivian, I said quietly. I built it from the ground up with the degrees I paid for myself, while you were taking out loans to send Bryn to parties. And just last week I finalized the sale of my proprietary software algorithms to a major federal banking institution. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, heavy and absolute. I looked directly into Eleanor Whitfield's terrified, grasping eyes. I sold it for $600 million. The number hit the room like a physical shockwave. Vivian actually stopped breathing for a few seconds. Bryn stared at me as if I had just materialized out of thin air. Eleanor Whitfield's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The sheer, incomprehensible magnitude of the number completely short-circuited her brain. $600 million. It was more money than the entire Whitfield lineage had seen in 3 generations combined. It was the kind of money that buys and sells country clubs for sport. And it belonged to the woman she had banished to row 6. 600 million, Vivian whispered, her eyes wide with a sudden predatory greed that made me physically nauseous. Alara, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? We're family, if we had known. If you had known, I cut her off, my voice sharp and unforgiving. You would have drained me dry. You would have used me to fund your pathetic obsession with keeping up appearances. Just like Eleanor tried to use me, you didn't want a daughter, Vivian, you wanted a sponsor. And the second you found out I was paying for the wedding, you immediately sided with the woman who treated me like garbage, because you thought she had the power. I stood up from the table, I picked up the green folder. You spent 8 months treating me like a checkbook, Eleanor, I said, looking down at the older woman. But you never once bothered to read the checkbook. If you had, you would have seen that the common bookkeeper held the only authority in the entire room. I could have taken your front rows, your state senator, and your crested invitations off the board on any day I chose. I just hoped, right up until 4 last night, that I wouldn't have to. Alara, please, Bryn sobbed, finally finding her voice. Please don't do this. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I let them do it. I wanted to belong so badly that I let them treat you like that. Please, I'll cancel the wedding. I won't marry Preston. Just forgive me. I looked at my sister. I saw the terrified, insecure girl she had always been beneath the polish and the expensive clothes. I felt a twinge of sorrow, but I did not let it break my resolve. The cycle had to end here. I don't hate you, Bryn, I said softly, but I cannot save you from the consequences of your own choices. You told me to handle the check and let the people who matter handle the details. So that is exactly what I did. I handled the check, I took it back, I turned my attention back to Eleanor. Now you handle what matters, I said to her, a cold, empty smile touching my lips. Handle the venue, the caterer, the state senator, and the social fallout. Without my money, let me know how that goes. I didn't wait for a response, I didn't need one. I turned on my heel and walked toward the glass doors. Alara, Vivian screamed, scrambling out of her chair. You can't just walk away from us. We are your family, you have $600 million. You owe us. I paused at the door. I didn't look back, I just spoke to the glass reflection. I don't owe you a single damn cent. You can keep the front seats, Vivian, all of them, keep every single chair in the room. I will keep my money and I will keep my dignity. I'm not going to spend one to lose the other. I pushed the glass doors open and walked away. I walked down the long carpeted hallway of my executive floor, the silence broken only by the rhythmic clicking of my heels. I didn't look back, I didn't hesitate, I just walked, leaving them trapped in the conference room with Marcus, the security guards, and the devastating, undeniable reality of their own ruin. That was the last time I ever saw Eleanor Whitfield. Here is how the fallout settled in the weeks that followed, because I know you want the ledger, and not just the emotional climax. I have always believed in a perfectly balanced ledger. The $400 came back to my accounts in full. The country club rebooked the Saturday date within a week, as premium venues always do, so they refunded the deposit minus the nominal fee. The caterer, the florist, and the photographer all followed suit. Alara Thorne's sole responsible party got her money back to where it belonged. The grand aristocratic Whitfield wedding never happened. There was absolutely no version of it that the Whitfield family could finance themselves, which is the entire pathetic truth of their existence distilled into one sentence. The gold-crested invitations became worthless pieces of paper. The state senator went to a different gala and the engagement. It ended not with a dramatic cinematic blow-up but with a quiet, inevitable fade. Bryn realized that she didn't want to marry a man who had lied to her about his finances, and Preston, true to his weak nature, never once called to defend her or me or himself. He let his mother do his thinking, and Bryn finally watched him with clear eyes. She gave the ring back a month later. Eleanor tried to spin a narrative, of course. She told anyone in their social circle who would listen that the common sister had destroyed the wedding out of spite and class resentment. She claimed I was mentally unstable, but the truth in elite circles always follows the money. People knew that the deposits had bounced. People knew about the pre-foreclosure on the Whitfield estate. Every single person in that county who had ever been looked down upon by Eleanor Whitfield knew exactly what had happened and exactly whose side they were on. Bryn moved out of the city. She cut contact with Vivian, finally recognizing the toxicity that had poisoned our entire childhood. She reached out to me 6 months later asking to meet for coffee. I agreed. We didn't magically heal decades of trauma in one afternoon, but we started talking. She got a job in marketing, an actual job that required hard work and accountability, and she started paying her own bills. As for Vivian, she is still living in the same apartment, still maxing out credit cards, still trying to project an illusion of wealth to people who don't care about her. She sends me emails sometimes demanding her fair share of my company's buyout. They all go directly to a legal spam folder monitored by Marcus. And what did I do with the $600 million? I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't throw a massive party. I continued building. I started a new venture capital fund specifically aimed at female founders in the fintech space, women who have the brilliance and the drive, but who lack the generational wealth and the recognizable last names that people like Eleanor Whitfield worship. I fund the women who build in silence. I want to talk to you directly now, to anyone watching this who has ever been the scapegoat in their own family. The one who is expected to give endlessly but who is never allowed to take up space. The one who is told that their boundaries are an act of aggression and that their financial stability is simply a community resource for the very people who mock them. People ask me sometimes if I ever regret it, if I ever wake up in the middle of the night and wish I had just paid the $400, sat quietly in row 6 and let my sister have her aristocratic fantasy. They ask if pulling the plug 3 weeks out wasn't too drastic, too severe a punishment for a simple seating chart. Couldn't you have just talked it through? They ask usually people who have never had to survive a toxic family dynamic. I talked it through for 28 years. Talking is exactly what manipulators count on. Talking is how they keep you trapped in row 6. They will let you talk and explain and negotiate forever, just as long as you keep handing over the check and never actually take action. They thrive in the gray area of endless discussion because in that gray area nothing ever changes. The boundaries are never enforced, the consequences are never realized. I do not regret a single, solitary thing. I do not regret the text I sent at 11:06 p.m. I do not regret the call to my corporate attorney at 11:09 p.m. I do not regret the forensic audit, the cold boardroom, or the moment I walked out of those glass doors and left my mother and Eleanor Whitfield drowning in the reality of their own vacuous existence. Because the lesson my sister learned that month about who she was, about what a toxic environment actually looks like, and about what a woman with self-respect does when she is fundamentally disrespected, that lesson was worth far more than any wedding. It was worth more than the $400. You cannot buy that kind of clarity. You can only demonstrate it, and I demonstrated it with the only tools I had: an unyielding boundary, a green folder of legally binding contracts, and the devastating power of the word no. If there is one profound truth I can hand to you from the ashes of this experience, it is this: your generosity is a gift, not the day someone tries to keep your open hand but demands that you turn your face away. The day they want the fruits of your labor but refuse to acknowledge your basic humanity. That is the day your kindness has been weaponized into a leash. Set the leash down, love people with everything you have, give until it feels good, but never, ever pay for the privilege of being treated as less. Keep your dignity and your generosity in the exact same hand. They cost you the same amount of blood, sweat, and tears to earn. Do not let anyone, not even your own mother or your own sister, force you to spend one in order to keep the other. The silence of an empire builder is not weakness. My silence during those 8 months of wedding planning, my silence in the lobby of the bridal boutique, my silence at the engagement dinner, none of that was submission. It was observation, it was the careful, meticulous gathering of data. When you are dealing with narcissists, your silence is the most terrifying weapon in your arsenal because they cannot manipulate what you do not say. They project their own insecurities onto your quiet exterior, assuming you are weak, assuming you are compliant. And all the while you are building the exact infrastructure needed to dismantle their illusions. I built my fintech empire in the shadows because the shadows were the only place I was safe from their grasping hands. But I did not stay in the shadows forever. I emerged when the time was right, not with a chaotic explosion of emotion, but with the cold, undeniable mathematics of a forensic audit. Justice, in my experience, is rarely swift. True justice is a slow burn. It is the delayed gratification of knowing that you hold all the cards, and waiting for the exact right moment to lay them on the table. The Whitfields thought they were playing a game of social chess, trying to maneuver me off the board entirely. They didn't realize until it was far too late that I owned the board, I owned the pieces, and I was financing the very room the game was being played in. I am Alara Thorne. I am not the boring freelance bookkeeper. I am the CEO who sold her company for $600 million. I am the woman who walked away without looking back. And I am the sister who finally broke the generational curse of our family by refusing to fund it. To the women out there who are quietly building their own empires, whether that empire is a multi-million-dollar tech startup, a small bakery, or simply left peace and financial independence away from toxic relatives, keep building. Let them underestimate you. Let them mock your industriousness and your common lifestyle. Let them relegate you to the back row in their minds. Because one day they will desperately need something from you. And on that day you will look at them with the calm, cold fury of a woman who knows her exact worth, and you will simply say, no. And in that single syllable you will reclaim every piece of yourself that they ever tried to steal. That is my story. One text message, one phone call to my corporate lawyer, and $400,000 that came back to the exact bank account it originated from. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that your worth was never up for a family vote, take that as a sign. You have the power to walk away, you have the power to close the checkbook, you have the power to build your own empire in the silence they forced upon you. Please drop a comment below and share your own experiences. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? Have you ever had to enforce a boundary that completely disrupted the family dynamic? I read every single comment and I want to hear your stories of resilience and empowerment. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of Alpha Mom Stories. Remember, the woman they treat like the help is usually the one holding the contract. Stay strong, stay silent, and build your empire. I will see you in the next video, but before we end, I want to take you behind the curtain of what it actually means to be a silent empire builder. Because the story of the wedding cancellation, the $400,000 deposit, and the $600 million boardroom confrontation, that is just the explosive finale. It is the fireworks display, but fireworks do not build themselves, they are meticulously assembled in the dark. For 8 grueling years, while my sister was attending lavish parties and my mother was racking up credit card debt to keep up with the Whitfields, I was engaged in a relentless, exhausting campaign of self-education and corporate endurance. Building a massive fintech empire is not a montage set to inspiring music. It is waking up at 4 a.m. every single day. It is staring at thousands of lines of code and dense financial regulatory documents until your vision blurs. It is being a woman in boardrooms filled with older men who assume you are there to fetch their coffee, and having to prove over and over again that you are the most intelligent, ruthless, and capable person in the room. I remember the first major contract I secured for my firm. I was 26 years old. I had pitched my algorithmic fraud detection software to a mid-sized regional bank that was bleeding millions of dollars a year to undetected internal embezzlement. They had brought in 3 different high-priced consulting firms before me, and all 3 had failed to find the leak. I found it in 48 hours. I traced a highly sophisticated microtransaction skimming operation straight to their chief financial officer. When I presented my findings to the bank's board of directors, they didn't thank me immediately. They were furious. They were embarrassed that a 26-year-old freelancer had exposed a massive vulnerability in their executive leadership. They tried to bury the report. They tried to intimidate me into signing a non-disclosure agreement and walking away with a nominal consulting fee. That was the moment I learned the true power of a contract and the true power of leverage. I hadn't just found the embezzlement, I had encrypted a secondary failsafe within my audit software. I looked the chairman of the board directly in the eye and explained with absolute freezing calm that my software had already generated an automated immutable report that was scheduled to be transmitted to federal banking regulators if the situation was not handled with full transparency and legal compliance. They paid me my full multi-million-dollar fee within 24 hours. They fired the CFO. They implemented my software across their entire network. That was the seed money for everything that came next. That was the money I used to hire the best engineers, the best corporate lawyers like Marcus, and the most impenetrable digital security experts on the East Coast. Every dollar I made was quietly reinvested into the architecture of my company. I didn't buy a flashy sports car, I didn't buy a massive mansion in the suburbs, I bought data servers, I bought legal retainers, I bought the quiet, unassailable power of absolute financial independence. And all the while I maintained the illusion of the boring bookkeeper for my family. Why? Because I knew that if they saw the success, they would immediately lay claim to it. They would view my empire as their personal treasury. Toxic families do not celebrate your success, they calculate how your success can benefit them. They view your boundaries not as healthy self-respect but as an unfair restriction on their access to your resources. The day the $600 million acquisition deal finally closed, it was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The exact same kind of Tuesday afternoon that Bryn sent that fateful text message months later. I was sitting in my penthouse office, the massive glass windows slick with rain obscuring the view of the Hudson River. Marcus walked into the room holding a sleek black tablet. He didn't say a word, he just placed the tablet on my desk. I looked at the screen. It was a digital confirmation from the Federal Reserve. The wire transfer had cleared, the funds were secured, $600 million. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, I didn't pop open a bottle of champagne even though there was a vintage bottle chilling in the executive suite refrigerator. I just sat there in the heavy, profound silence of the room. I looked down at my hands, they were trembling, just slightly. I had spent my entire life bracing for impact, anticipating the next financial disaster Vivian would create, the next humiliation Eleanor Whitfield would inflict, the next time I would be pushed into the background. And in that single moment, looking at that digital receipt, I realized that the bracing was over. I was untouchable, they could never hurt me again because they no longer possessed the leverage to do so. That is what delayed justice truly feels like. It doesn't feel like a movie, it doesn't feel like an adrenaline rush. It feels like taking a deep, unrestricted breath for the very first time in your entire life. It feels like the heavy, suffocating weight of generational dysfunction lifting off your shoulders and dissolving into the ether. When you build in silence, when you accumulate your power in the shadows, you learn to appreciate the exquisite beauty of timing. You learn that you don't have to react to every insult. You don't have to engage in every petty argument over a seating chart or a slideshow. You can just smile, nod, and document the behavior, knowing with absolute certainty that you hold the power to completely rewrite the narrative whenever you choose. So I will say it again, for every person watching this who needs to hear it, do not let their noise distract you from your building. Do not let their contempt break your focus. The people who relegate you to row 6 are entirely dependent on your presence in the room. They need you there to absorb their insecurities. They need you there to serve as the contrast to their fabricated grandeur. Remove yourself from the room, pull your funding, emotional and financial, and watch how quickly their grand illusions collapse under their own weight. You are not the scapegoat, you are not the ATM, you are not the afterthought, you are the architect of your own destiny. And the empire you build in silence will eventually echo loud enough to shatter their glass houses. Keep building, keep auditing, keep smiling that cold, dangerous smile, your time will come. And when it does, make sure you have the contract signed, the lawyer on speed dial, and the absolute courage to walk away without ever looking back. This is the conclusion of a Lara Thorne story, a story of a $600 million reality check, a cancelled aristocratic fantasy, and the profound liberation of walking away from the people who never deserved a front row seat to your life in the first place. Remember, true power doesn't scream, it doesn't throw tantrums. True power sits quietly at the head of a black marble table, opens a green folder, and simply says no. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of this community. I'll see you in the next chapter.